I am pleased to introduce Dr. Heather Wilson, the 24th Secretary of the U.S. Air Force and the first Air Force Academy graduate to hold the service's top civilian post. Secretary Wilson assumes her new position at a time when many believe the U.S. Air Force faces a number of serious readiness and modernization challenges. We at Intelsat General, together with the commercial satellite industry, stand ready to continue our partnership with the U.S. Air Force in helping to meet those goals.
Thank all of you for everything you do for our country and for the people who serve this country. I'd use this opportunity. I'm going to say a few things and then open it up to questions. I see some of my former colleagues here this morning, and I wanted to say hello to you and welcome to you. It was wonderful last night to be at the baseball game and see, normally the congressional baseball game, which I played twice I played left bench on the congressional baseball team for a couple of years. And it was usually just members and staffers and families. It's a wonderful bipartisan affair, but I was so pleased to see the Nat Stadium packed last night. I think that sent a real message to America that we may disagree on policy issues, but we can be friends and fellows in this country. And so it was a wonderful. Once I retired from left bench, I was then the mother of the bat boy for about 6 years, and the bat boy was there with me last night, who is now like 6'5", my son Joshua. So I have changed my approach to discipline a long time ago. But it's good to be with all of you here this morning. It was 1977 on this day. I always like this day in history things. The Air Force is great about it. But 1977 on this day, Wernher von Braun passed away. He was actually right across the river here in Alexandria, Virginia. And he became a proud American, and he was a foremost rocket scientist. And our now commander of Stratcom, when he was in the 5th grade, met Wernher von Braun. It's amazing how much has happened in just a few short lifetimes in technology in this country. And who's inspired by the previous generation. John Hyten was that 5th grader when he met von Braun. I had the opportunity about my 3rd week in the job here to get out of the Pentagon. It improved my attitude significantly. They let me go out to be with airmen. I went out to Colorado Springs, Colorado, to the Air Force Academy graduation and spent some time at Pete Field and at Schriever. And I had the opportunity at Pete Field, and I met Airman First Class Jake Pullen. So an Airman First Class, which really means a few years out of high school. And he was actually the first airman that I gave a coin to. When I was in the service, the giving of coins things wasn't quite so big, but it's a big deal now. And as my brother would say, it was a wicked big deal to get one from the Secretary of the Air Force, I guess. Well, he comes from a long line of military family, mostly Marine Corps and Navy, but he decided that he would enlist in the Air Force. He is a defensive space control operator, which means that he monitors our systems and he responds to ensure that no one keeps the United States from sending and receiving the information that our warfighters need. He is an expert at his craft. In 2016, he deployed to Qatar in the Middle East, and he supported more than 5,000 remotely piloted aircraft combat sorties, including one that was going after a high-value target involved in an engagement and 9 U.S. Navy force movements. And his job was to make sure that the communications were not jammed by anybody else. He's supported red flag exercises. He devised new ways to counteract the jamming efforts of aggressors and gave really top-notch training to American airmen. And in 2016, he was the Space Operator of the Year. He's been selected for a month-long space tactician internship with the MIT Lincoln Laboratories, where he's going to help us develop better understanding of the space surveillance network so he can understand and apply what he's learned to best practices in the United States Air Force. And in the middle of all of this airman first class, who's a few years out of high school, is in his third year of a bachelor's degree in aeronautics by distance. These are the kids who are defending our country. And he says, you know, I know what I'm doing is important. It's going to be even more important in the future. We all depend on space. Everything is enabled by space. And it might seem intimidating, but people shouldn't think about this as something out of reach. It's part of our daily lives. That's more likely that a 20-year-old would say something like that than you or I, right? It's part of our daily lives. The things we take for granted today as part of our daily lives were Buck Rogers stuff when we were kids. I remember I was standing on the floor of the house when I saw the first iPhone. One of my colleagues had one. I never knew I needed one until that point. It's true. And at the time that was rolled out, it was advertised as a phone and music and a camera all in one. But if we rolled that out today, we wouldn't have it's not a phone, and it's all about the apps. It's about the way we use these tools to do other things. And that's what Airman Jake Pullen understands. When we were kids, and even when the iPhone was first rolled out, space was a pretty benign place. And in 2007, China very visibly demonstrated that that wasn't the case with the launch of a kinetic interceptor, which destroyed one of their own dead weather satellites and spread about 100,000 pieces of debris throughout the orbital domain. But it hasn't stopped since then. We used to think of it as a benign place from which we watched and communicated and assumed that it would always be there. But that is not the case anymore. We are heavily dependent upon space, and our adversaries know it. In any future conflict, space will be contested, possibly in the early stages of tension, because we are so vulnerable there, and our adversaries may think that challenging us there could cause the United States to de-escalate rather than defend our vital national interests. So what do we do? And what is the Air Force doing? The Air Force has tremendous responsibility for the things in space. About 80% of what's done in space by the Defense Department is done by the United States Air Force, and it's been that way for 54 years. Our responsibility is to organize, train, and equip to maintain space superiority. But we're trying to change the culture with respect to space in the Air Force, from one that assumes it's a benign environment to one that is focused on warfighting, on defending our systems, on the young airmen like Jake Pullen. We have started to change this culture by the way in which we train our people. Like our other combat arms, we're now going into Space Forces to a kind of 4-month on, 4-month off rotation, where a space operator would have 4 months on the floor operating space aircraft, and then 4 months away from the floor, spiraling up their understanding and capabilities to be able to think about and prepare for a contested space environment. So that we're building their skills in ways that we had not before. I got to tell you, for the young space warriors out in Colorado, they welcome this because they understand, probably better than the rest of us, just how vulnerable we are, and they are deeply committed to defending the capabilities that our country depends upon. So what are those capabilities? What do we need to protect? The first is we need to protect assured access to space. And in the 1990s, we almost lost our access to space in this country with the collapse of a number of launch providers. We're no longer in that situation anymore. We've got a number of healthy companies, a number of emerging companies. We've got 2 healthy competitors, and we need to be able to end our reliance on Russian rocket launchers. there's a lot of interesting things coming out of commercial space at the moment, and the Air Force is kind of watching these things very carefully. We will benefit, I think, from competitive launch. We will purchase launch services, and competition is helping to drive down the price and give us new capabilities and drive innovation in this industry. And that's good for all of us. So we need assured access to space. We need dynamic situational awareness in space. What do I mean by that? Well, in the past, the Air Force took on the responsibility of cataloging what was up there. So just saying, yep, just making sure stuff doesn't bump into other stuff. That's not good enough. We need near real-time understanding of what is in space, where it's moving, and why. So dynamic situational awareness. We need integrated command and control, so that like our other air forces, we can see what's out there, we can control what we're trying to do in that environment. If you can't control anything, if you can't command anything, then you're not really going to be able to prevail and be resilient in space. And the FY18 budget includes funding for an integrated command center. One of the things that we've done with a lot of our space systems is, we run them like science experiments, because that's kind of, what they were. They were kind of one-offs or single constellations, and they had unique ground control, and they weren't integrated as part of a system. In a very fast-moving, dynamic environment, you need to be able to have integrated command and control and not 12 or 13 independent systems with different people operating them. That's not good enough. So we were moving to an integrated command center. And honestly, something to tell your clients, if you're going to propose a space system in the future and it doesn't integrate into the integrated command center, which will be an open architecture, you're not going to win the bid. Period. Full stop. We must have integrated space command and control. We have to have the capacity to defend our satellites and our space capability. Now that means a lot of different things and a lot of different strategies. Everything from disaggregated key capabilities to dispersion and redundancy, the ability to maneuver or deflect, the ability to be resilient in the face of an attack, and to rapidly reconstitute capabilities. There are a number of strategies and tactics that over the last couple of years we've been developing. Those concepts will impact the design of satellites and how we operate them. So the intention, by developing these capabilities, by training people like Jake Pullen, is that we will be able to deter an attack on our space capabilities, and if deterrence fails, take a punch and still deliver. That's the objective. Well, with respect to organization, we now have a National Space Defense Center. It was stood up last year as an experiment. They went through all kinds of things and came up with 40 different ideas to improve our ability to operate, to be resilient, and to maintain space superiority. Many of them we're moving forward on implementing. And we have now shifted from that being an experiment to it being an initial operating capability for a National Space Defense Center, again, in Colorado. But that's not enough. As we've looked at the Air Force and looked at the Defense Department, it is my belief and the belief of the Chief of Staff that we need to integrate, normalize, and elevate space within the Air Force and in the Department of Defense. We needed to clarify who had what responsibilities and who doesn't have what responsibilities so that we can operate quickly and turn inside of the enemy. That's another, I should have done it like this, turn inside the enemy. There we go. So today, I actually signed this morning several changes on how we are organizing the United States Air Force with respect to space. The Air Force will create a new Deputy Chief of Staff for Space Operations. It'll stand up initially on the 1st of August. It will be a 3-star in the Air Force who will have a staff to provide advice and counsel to me and the Chief of Staff on all space-related matters. The Deputy Chief of Staff will also lead the formulation, coordination, dissemination, implementation. You got to have enough shuns in every directive, and execution of Air Force space policy, strategy, and guidance. The intention is for this person to exercise oversight across the Air Force headquarters staffs so that we get uniformity and consistency of space-related requirements. We get planning and programming within the United States Air Force, look at resource allocation, and analyze, assess, and make recommendations to the Chief and I about what the Air Force should do with respect to space. We are creating a strong senior space advocate within the United States Air Force. But there are challenges beyond just Air Force operations and elevating space as a warfighting effort. And that is to look at what do we do in the Defense Department as a whole. Last Friday, the Deputy Secretary of Defense signed a new directive that reaffirms that the Secretary of the United States Air Force, at least for the next year when we will then review it again, will continue to be the principal Department of Defense Space Advisor. So it will be my responsibility not only to look at what the Air Force is doing, but to look at the space enterprise across the Department of Defense. But we're going to clean up some of our authorities and processes with respect to that as well. We will continue to have an office, the principal advisor for the Secretary of Defense for Space. So they will continue to have that support for the Secretary, separate from what the Air Force does, because the other services need to have confidence that in my broad Defense Department role, that they have a voice and that we're listening to them and looking in an integrated way. We'll focus on policy and strategy and plan alignment. We'll look at the budgets intensely across the Department of Defense with respect to space and look at technical integration and program coordination. We will do this as a joint office. So we will have Army, Navy, Air Force, and if we can find a Marine who's interested in space, we'll take them too. No, I didn't mean that. We'll also have some of our allies there, as we currently have in the Office of Space in the Pentagon. So the intention here is to elevate space as a warfighting domain in the United States Air Force, as a warfighting profession in the United States Air Force, with the creation of a Deputy Chief of Staff, and to take seriously and intensely my responsibility across the Department of Defense with respect to policy, strategy, budget integration, and program alignment. We also have to look and continue to make progress on issues related to acquisition. The 2017 National Defense Authorization Act gave some additional authorities, moved some things down from the Office of the Secretary of Defense back to the Air Force, so-called Milestone A Decision Authority, so that we would manage programs within the Air Force. We are also not stopping there. We're taking a look at all of the decision points as to who needs to be involved for the purposes of advice and informing and getting ideas, but also clarify who really decides so that we can get rapid decisions on exceptional capabilities and get them to the warfighter. Not everything is a major multi-million-dollar or even billion-dollar program. Those kinds of programs tend to take a long time. You spend a lot of time reducing risk and developing new capabilities. There are other things that we just need to be able to do very quickly. Whether we're using the Rapid Capabilities Office, which is a new authority that we have in the Defense Department, kind of modeling the SOCOM version of acquisition, where if somebody in Colorado Springs needs a new box with a new gadget on a new frequency, and it's a matter of getting something important to the warfighter and protecting our capabilities, they should be able to go directly and get that done in a very short period of time. That's our responsibility to the warfighter, and Air Force acquisition has to be able to streamline and accelerate procurements when the warfighter needs them. With respect to space, there is insatiable demand. There is no question that it is an enabling capability for all of our other forces. In the FY18 budget, there is a 20% increase in Air Force space funds. Now, for those of you who are getting wide-eyed about that, it's not going to continue on that same rate of increase. But it will have to continue to increase because we have to preserve our capabilities for our warfighters and make sure that we operate a budget process where space, as an enabling capability for the warfighter, is given its due. with that, I would be happy to open this up for questions and take anything that you may have for me on this or any other extraneous topics. Yeah.
Hi, Secretary. I'm Pat Hosey-James. Why didn't the Air Force compete the X-37B launch contract that was recently awarded?
The launch contract for that was done in accordance with our acquisition guidelines and in complete compliance with them. And I probably won't say any more than that on that publicly on that one.
Okay, so what are those regulations then that prevented you from competing it?
It wasn't a case of preventing. It was a case of a choice that we made. It was in accordance with the acquisition guidelines, and that's probably all I've got on that one. Yeah. Chris.
Hi, ma'am. Philip Swartz with Space News. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about some of the people involved in the new A11 staff position that's being set up. Are you looking to hire more people for that position, transfer them from someplace else in the Pentagon, and then do you have an individual in mind currently that you would like to see lead that position?
We will be announcing within the next couple of weeks at least the lead position there as the Deputy Chief of Staff, but I'm not going to announce that today. We've got a few more steps to take there. We will also be advertising for a senior executive service person as the principal deputy there. So probably someone with a very deep, rich experience in the space world as a civilian. And then we're working through all of the wiring diagrams and which positions go where. But there will be a staff for the Deputy Chief of Staff. By the 1st of August, he'll probably have about 10 key players in place and then build it out from there.
Just a quick follow-up. There's still a lot of positions in the Pentagon that haven't been confirmed by the Senate yet. Do you foresee that causing any problems when you're trying to set up these new capabilities?
Actually, not with respect to space, I don't think. I will also be. We've had a number of because they're senior civilians, but they're not confirmed positions in the space world. We've got a fantastic group of military officers with respect to space. Not only General Raymond and General Hyten, but when I was out in Colorado, you look around the table and it's up and down. There's some exceptionally great leadership in space in the Air Force at the moment. And so I think we're well served there. We've got a lot of talent. One of the responsibilities in the new Deputy Chief of Staff will be to be the, I think there's a word for it the military has, but basically the career manager for all of the space professionals. And one of the things I am a little concerned about, and the Chief and I have talked about this, is we don't have enough space professionals on the joint staff. So identifying people coming up, helping develop their careers, so that we're giving them the joint experience. And honestly, the joint staff has people on it who understand space capabilities and vulnerabilities as a warfighter. So did I answer your question? I kind of diverted there a little bit, but are we good? Okay. Maybe over here.
Good morning, Madam Secretary. Warren Furster with Bryce Space and Technology. I had another question about launch. You're obviously familiar with the history. You alluded to it in the 1990s where a couple of companies collapsed. And that was because the commercial market collapsed right around 2000. And the Air Force was trying to piggyback on that and kind of got left holding the bag, so to speak. And I'm curious because the Air Force seems to be moving in that direction again where you want to leverage the commercial market. And with these launch services agreements, and I'm wondering, it seems to be that you're heading down the same path that kind of led to the problems that you alluded to earlier. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
We have a national policy that we need assured access to space, and the preference is to have at least 2 providers of launch services. I think we're in a much better position as a country than we were in the 1990s. And there's not only do we have 2 launch providers now, and SpaceX is moving forward with the certification of a heavy rocket as well, but there's a lot of innovation coming out of the commercial sector that we're actually really interested in. What does this do for us as a country? with respect to innovation, and it's driving innovation in the industry, which I think is really good for all of us. It's good for the taxpayer, but it's also good for commercial industry. So, you know, we have an industrial base that, with respect to defense, that's fragile. It's not only in space; it's across the board. I was just in Baltimore yesterday with the CEOs of the companies building the F-35, and all of our partners from 7 other countries. And we're now shifting from production, initial rate production, into sustainment of that system. One of the big issues is the industrial base. So we know as a nation we have a fragile industrial base. It's no different in space than it is for the machine parts for the F-35. And it's an issue. We're going to have to manage it. But right now, we're pleased to see the innovation that's going on in the space sector.
If I could just follow that up briefly. In the past, some Air Force officials have raised the possibility of perhaps giving guaranteed contracts to 1 or 2 of the EELV competitors going forward. What are your thoughts on that?
I know that there is an acquisition strategy with respect to launch that's working its way through the Air Force and the Office of the Secretary of Defense. I know they actually had at least one meeting on that this week. I'm not sure of the result of that meeting yet, actually, so I'd probably want to not answer that question today. But I'm sure once that works its way through, we'll be open about it and what we're going to do.
Fair enough. Thank you.
You here?
Thank you, Madam Secretary. John Harper with National Defense Magazine. You noted that U.S. space systems are vulnerable to adversaries' ASATs and other types of weapons, but the flip side of that is obviously their space systems would presumably be vulnerable as well. What is the Air Force doing at this time to develop offensive space capabilities to degrade adversary systems?
I would say this. First of all, we are more dependent than our adversaries. So it is an asymmetric vulnerability in our case, we all hope that deterrence works, both deterrence of all kinds, and that we don't end up in any kind of conflict, because we believe that any conflict will extend into space because we are more vulnerable than our adversaries are. So that should be a concern, I think we're at a disadvantage, and we have to prepare for that eventuality. Over here, yes, sir.
Morning, ma'am. My name's Kurt Hackmer. I think I'm the only non-reporter here. So, my question is you were talking about normalizing space, and I look back to the F-22 or F-35. Seems like the Air Force, every time there's a new Air Combat Command commander, they just go with the same old, we're going to support the Air Force position. Seems like every time we get a new Air Force Space Command commander, there's a clean sheet of paper, and they re-look at what they need in terms of requirements. My question is the Air Force going to go out and articulate for the Congress and for industry a clear roadmap, a space roadmap that has a budget, priorities, and programs that we can support and build to and create that industrial base to achieve that objective?
That's actually a really good question. So the reporters in the room should take note. That guy, he's got a good a couple of things. First, by having a deputy chief of staff, one of the things that we'll do is normalize the requirements process. And for, there's part of me that says that very few breakthroughs were ever the result of a requirements document. We all understand that you still have to steward path-breaking innovation. But the requirements process does help to normalize space within the Air Force. The second thing is that this budget we've had a tracking tool for space, kind of a marker on space things within the Air Force budget for a while. But this year it's actually formalized, and it's a Major Force Program 12. So MFP 12 is space related. So you can now, turn the budget on its side and just look only at MFP 12 and see kind of where that is. So it does get back to kind of normalizing not only as a warfighting domain, but normalizing within the Air Force that this is no longer just a science experiment. This is where we will have plans, requirements, budgets, and treat this in the same way that we treat other things in aerospace.
Folks, we don't have time for any more questions at this stage, so I think we're going to have to wrap it up. First of all, I'd like you all to join me in a round of applause for the Secretary of Air Force.